Broke Cowboy bought a ranch for $10 until the horse inside changed his life. It was the end of a sweltering August afternoon when Caleb Durst rode into the town of Redstone, Texas, with exactly $11 in his pocket, a worn hat on his head, and a debt of honor weighing heavier than any sack of gold he had ever carried. He was 32 years old, hands calloused from years of working other men's land, and a past that insisted on walking beside him like a shadow the sun could never quite erase. Caleb had been a cowboy since the age of 15. He had worked on more than 20 ranches scattered across Texas, New Mexico, and Kansas. He could rope, shoe, break, and drive a herd for hundreds of miles without losing a single animal. He was respected among the men of the range, feared among the troublemakers of the saloon, and loved by no woman who had ever stayed behind waiting for him. Life on the road left no room for roots. But something had changed that summer. Something he himself had difficulty naming, like a dull ache in his chest that came from no wound at all. He tied his old horse, a tired bay called Durst, to the post in front of Redstone's general store and walked in with the intention of buying something to eat. The man behind the counter was thin, with a thick mustache and small eyes that measured everything with the precision of a scale. Caleb asked for cornbread and dried beans. While the man gathered the items, a handwritten sheet of paper stuck to the wall caught his attention. It was written in large, trembling letters, as though whoever wrote it knew it might be the last thing they would ever write. The paper read, "For sale, Harlow Ranch, 53 acres, 1 house, 1 barn, 1 well. Price, $10. See Judge Aldrin on Main Street." Caleb stared at that paper for a long time. The man behind the counter noticed the look and said, without being asked, "Don't waste your time, son. That ranch is cursed. 3 men tried to buy it before you showed up, and all 3 walked away before signing the paper." Caleb turned his face slowly toward him. "Why?" The man wiped his hands on his apron and lowered his voice. "Even though there was no one else in the store. Because of the horse locked up in that barn, nobody can get anywhere near it. It knocked 2 men flat, broke a 3rd man's rib. Old Harlow died without ever being able to break that beast and left everything abandoned. The ranch ended up in the judge's hands on account of debts, and now the judge just wants to be rid of the problem." Caleb looked back at the paper. "And the horse? Does it come with the ranch?" The man gave a short laugh. "Lord help us. It does. And the judge won't take the animal out of the deal. Either you take everything or you take nothing." Caleb picked up the cornbread and the beans, laid the coins on the counter and said, "Point me to Judge Aldrin's office." Redstone's Main Street was narrow and dusty, flanked by a saloon, a blacksmith, a land office, and a small white wooden church that looked embarrassed to be standing among so many sins. The judge's office was at the end of the street, in a 2-story building that tried to project authority with its green-painted shutters. Judge Aldrin was a heavy man with white hair and a permanently bored expression, like someone who had already seen everything bad the world had to offer and had long since stopped being surprised by it. He looked Caleb up and down when the cowboy walked in, hat in hand, and said he wanted to buy the Harlow Ranch. The judge opened a drawer, pulled out a contract that was already prepared, as if he'd been expecting someone to show up sooner or later, and said, $10. The ranch, the house, the barn, the well, and the horse. All together, no separating them. You sign here and take the problems on yourself. Caleb put $10 on the table. He kept $1 in his pocket. He signed the paper. The judge folded the bills, tucked them in the drawer, and held out the key to the barn padlock. Then he looked at Caleb with something that might have been mistaken for pity, but was in fact poorly disguised admiration. "Cowboy, tell me something. Why did you do this?" Caleb put the key in his pocket, set his hat back on his head, and answered, "Because a man who has nothing to lose," and walked out. The Harlow Ranch was 3 miles north of town, down a dirt road that wound between dry brush and red rocks. Caleb arrived as the day was closing, the sky stained orange and purple over the distant hills. The house was small, its wood darkened by time, with a porch that was giving way on one side. The well had a new rope, which was a good sign, and the barn stood solid, locked with a rusted padlock. He tied Durst to a tree trunk and stood before the barn for a long moment. From inside came no sound at all, only silence. The kind of silence that is not the absence of noise, but the presence of something that is waiting. Caleb put the key in the lock. The padlock opened with a dry click. He pushed the door open slowly. The smell came first. Animal sweat, old straw, leather, and something harder to describe, a warm and living smell, like a storm kept inside four walls. And then, when Caleb's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw it. The horse was black, not the ordinary black of many animals that in the light reveal shades of brown or grey. This was an absolute black, like a moonless sky, like deep water that lets you see no bottom. Tall, broad-chested, neck arched with that specific nobility that only truly free animals carry in their bodies. The mane fell to both sides like curtains of dark silk, and the eyes, two circles of golden amber glowing in the shadows, fixed on Caleb with an intensity that was not aggression. It was assessment. The horse did not move, did not snort, did not back away. It stood at the far end of the barn, watching that man, as if it knew exactly what he was worth, and had not yet decided what to do with that information. Caleb did not move either. He stood in the entrance, letting the animal read whatever it wanted to read in him. There was nothing to hide. He was just a tired, lonely man, returning to a land that perhaps would never truly receive him. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "I didn't come to take you. I just came to see you. You can rest easy," and close the door. That night Caleb slept on the house's porch because the inside was full of cobwebs and the mattress in the only bedroom had been eaten by rats. He made a small fire, ate the cold beans with the cornbread, and lay looking up at the star-filled sky with that rare feeling he did not quite know how to name. It was not happiness. It was something older than happiness. It was the feeling of being in the right place. The next morning he woke before sunrise. He opened the barn again. The horse was in the same spot, standing as if it had not slept or as if sleep were not something that animal needed. Caleb walked in. He left the door open behind him. He brought no rope, no bridle, nothing at all. He just walked in and sat down on the straw floor, his back against the wooden wall, and stayed there. The horse watched, first with its golden eyes, then with its ears. Then with its nostrils opening and closing, trying to make sense of the smell of a man mixed with dust and cold night. Caleb did nothing. He just stayed there. This went on for 3 days. On the 4th day, when Caleb walked in and sat on the floor, as had become his habit, the black horse took 3 steps toward him, stopped, waited. Caleb did not react. Then the horse took 2 more steps, lowered its neck, and touched its muzzle to Caleb's hands with the gentleness of something that understands the weight of every gesture it makes. Caleb felt the warmth of that breath on his palms, and for the first time in many years his eyes went wet. He did not cry, but almost. He ran his hand slowly along the animal's muzzle. The horse did not pull back. It stood still, breathing, allowing itself to be touched as if this were an act between equals, not domination, but recognition. In that moment, Caleb understood that this horse was not wild out of meanness. It was wild because no one had ever bothered to deserve it. He named the horse Night. In the days that followed, Caleb began rebuilding the ranch with the hands he had. He fixed the porch with lumber he found in the barn. He cleaned out the well. He swept the house, killed the spiders, and burned the old mattress in the yard. He planted a small garden near the house with seeds he found in a tin box inside the kitchen. And every morning, before anything else, he went into the barn and spent time with Night. The progress was slow. The horse let Caleb touch his neck, his mane, his flanks, let him walk around him. But any sudden movement, any sharper tone of voice, any gesture that resembled a command, and Night would retreat to the back of the barn, and the amber eyes would close like two gates shutting. Caleb learned to move slowly, learned to speak quietly, learned to breathe differently, and realized one afternoon that the horse was teaching him just as much as he was teaching the horse. It was on an afternoon in September, nearly 3 weeks after Caleb had arrived at the ranch, that trouble began to show itself. 3 riders came up the dirt road with the sun already dropping behind them, so that their silhouettes arrived before their faces did. The leader was a tall man, with a sun-burned face and a nose that had been broken more than once. His name was Cole Merritt, and anyone in Redstone could have told you who he was without needing to think twice. Cole Merritt was the richest man in the county. He had land, he had cattle, he had men working for him, and he had the habit of wanting what was not his. The Harlow Ranch sat wedged exactly between 2 of Merritt's properties, and that detail of $10 had turned a simple plan of land absorption into an unexpected problem. Merritt dismounted with the ease of a man stepping onto ground he already considers his own. He looked at Caleb, who was mending the fence outside the house, and said without preamble, "You bought this land for a laughable price. I'll offer you $50 to pack your things and disappear." Caleb kept mending the fence. "I'm not selling." Merritt crossed his arms. "$150. I'm not selling." There was a pause. One of Merritt's men, a fellow with cold eyes and fingers always near the grip of his revolver, shifted slightly to one side, a repositioning that Caleb saw without needing to look. Merritt said, "You're a fool, son. This land isn't worth your stubbornness." Caleb stood up, looked Merritt directly in the eye, and said with a voice as calm as the inside of a well, "Maybe not, but it's mine." Merritt stared at him for a long moment. Then he climbed back on his horse, turned his back, and said, without bothering to look behind him, "You'll change your mind. It's a shame you need more persuasive reasons to do it." And they rode off. Caleb stood watching the dust the horses raised on the road. Then he went to the barn, opened the door, walked in and stayed with Night for a good hour, saying nothing, just with his open palm resting on the horse's warm neck. That night, he did not sleep well. 2 days later, he woke in the middle of the night to the smell of smoke. The hay in the corner of the barn was catching fire. Caleb ran barefoot out of the house, grabbed the bucket he used for the well, ran back, threw water on the hay. 2 trips. 3. The fire was new, still small, and he managed to get it under control before it spread. But it was close. Inside the barn, Night had been in a state Caleb had never seen in the animal before. He was not in a panic. He was completely still, with his nostrils wide open and his golden eyes burning like embers, staring at the barn door with an attention so absolute it seemed carved from stone. Caleb went to him, put his hand on his neck, felt that the animal was trembling inside, a deep, controlled trembling, like that of a man who has decided not to be afraid, but feels the fear all the same. "I know," said Caleb in a low voice. "I know." The next day, Caleb rode to Redstone. He went into the saloon where Merritt's men usually drank and did what he wanted to do before anything else. He talked. He talked to the barber, to the blacksmith, to the man at the general store who had told him about the ranch. And what he learned was this. Old Harlow had refused to sell his land to Merritt 5 years earlier. In the 2 years that followed, his cattle began dying mysteriously. His water source was poisoned, and his workers left one by one without explanation. Harlow held on alone until his heart gave out on a winter morning. He left behind the abandoned ranch, the debts, and the horse no one had ever managed to break. The horse that nobody could quite explain where it had come from. Caleb rode back to the ranch, thinking. When he arrived, he went straight to the barn, walked in, and stood looking at Night with a new understanding. The animal had lived there, in that barn, through all that time of violence and decay. Had watched old Harlow lose everything, had watched men come and try to break him by force, and had resisted every single one of them, not out of wildness, out of dignity. Caleb said, "You stayed here keeping watch over this place, didn't you?" Night looked at him. The amber eyes held an expression that in a human being would have been called confirmation. That afternoon, for the first time, Caleb put a halter on Night. Not with force, not in a hurry. He simply laid the braided leather over the animal's muzzle with open hands, saying with his whole body that it was not a chain, that it was only a thread of conversation between the two of them. Night stood still. He allowed it. Caleb stood beside the animal for a long time, the halter in his hand, without moving. Then he took a step back. Night followed, 1 step, 2, 3, to the barn door, into the afternoon light. When Night's hooves touched the red earth outside the barn for the first time, the horse stopped, opened his nostrils to the air, and did something Caleb had never seen in any horse before. He stood perfectly still, neck raised, and seemed simply to breathe the world in with enormous depth, as though drinking in the air and the light and the smell of the earth after a very, very long time without being able to do so. Caleb stood beside him, and felt, for a reason he could not explain even to himself, that this moment was more important than any other he had ever lived. The trouble with Merritt came back before the end of the week. This time it was not fire, it was cattle. 30 or so steers pushed through the ranch's wire fence in the night, as if the fence had simply fallen and trampled the garden Caleb had planted. When he woke and went out to look, the posts were knocked down with axe marks that were not made by any animal. Caleb stood looking at the damage for a time. Then he went to the barn, took the halter, and went out with Night for the first time into the open range. There was no saddle. Caleb had never tried to put a saddle on Night. He mounted the animal with a smooth, unhurried movement, letting each step be a choice of Night's as much as his own. And when he finally sat on the back of that black horse, with no saddle, no bridle, only the simple halter and improvised reins, he felt beneath him a power unlike any horse he had ever ridden. Night did not need pressure on his flanks to move. He responded to the weight of the body, the tilt of the hips, the breath. It was as though they were reading each other at the same time. Caleb drove the cattle back to Merritt's side and mended the fence with new wire he bought in Redstone, using his last dollar. That afternoon, Merritt's messenger arrived, with a note written on a folded piece of paper. It read, "Final offer, $200. Reply by noon tomorrow or the next problem will not be the garden." Caleb read the note, folded it back, went into the barn where Night was waiting and sat on the straw floor for a good hour, thinking. He was a man without money, without allies, without resources. Merritt had all of that, and also had the law in his pocket, because the Redstone sheriff was a man who ate at Merritt's table 3 times a week. Any open dispute, Caleb would lose. But there was something Merritt did not have. There was something that no amount of money had managed to buy through all those years. The next morning, Caleb rode to Redstone, not to the judge's office, not to the sheriff. He went to the small white wooden church at the end of the street and spoke with the pastor, a lean and serious man called Reverend Hale. The Reverend was not a friend of Merritt's. He never had been, and he had known the county for decades. Caleb explained the situation. The Reverend listened without interrupting, then said, "What are you asking of me?" Caleb said, "Witnesses. People who have lived here long enough to know what happened to old Harlow. People who are not afraid to say what they know, if there is someone with enough authority to listen." The Reverend was silent for a moment, then said, "There is a circuit judge. He comes through here every 2 months. He will be in Redstone in 3 weeks. 3 weeks, said Caleb. That is, if you can hold on for 3 weeks, said the Reverend, without malice, only with the honesty of an old man. Caleb rode back to the ranch. He spent the afternoon with Knight, riding across the land, learning every inch of the property, the way the animal already knew it. Knight knew where the ground was most solid, where rocks lay hidden under the sand, where the wind changed direction near the hills. He ran with Caleb in absolute silence, no sound of hooves, as if the ground absorbed them. That night, Caleb slept with his rifle beside him. Merritt's pressure returned 3 days later, but in a different form. 2 riders appeared on horseback at the edge of the property at dusk, just standing there watching. They did nothing. They simply stayed, like a reminder that there was power observing. Caleb saw them from the porch. He did not react. He sat there, hat on his head, drinking black coffee he had made on the stove he had finally managed to repair. Knight, loose on the land as was now his habit, walked to the fence and stood looking at the 2 riders with that stillness that was worse than any threat. The horses of Merritt's men backed away, nervous without any command being given. The riders exchanged a look and rode off. Caleb heard, for the first time in weeks, the sound of his own laughter. The days that followed were tense but quiet. Caleb worked the ranch, fixed what needed fixing, planted again what had been destroyed. And every morning, before anything else, he rode Knight bareback around the perimeter of the property like a man doing rounds, like a man saying to the world and to himself, "I am here. This place is real. This place is mine." 1 week before the circuit judge was due to arrive, Merritt came in person, this time not with 2 men, with 5, all armed, all carrying the specific posture of men who have been paid to intimidate and are good at the work. Merritt dismounted with an expression that had moved past negotiation into something else entirely. He said, "You're stubborn or you're stupid, son. I haven't decided which yet." Caleb was standing on the porch. He did not come down the steps. He said, "There is a circuit judge arriving in Redstone in 7 days. I have statements from 8 people who witnessed what happened to old Harlow. I know of 2 workers who left your ranch 3 years ago and who have a great deal to say if someone with legal authority asks them to speak." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Merritt looked at him with an expression of pure calculation. Then he looked at the barn, and then he looked at the field where Knight was standing, watching the group with his golden eyes burning. Merritt said, slowly, "Where did that horse come from?" Caleb said, "He's mine." Merritt stared at Knight for a long moment, with an expression Caleb had not expected to see on a man like that. It was something close to recognition, as if he knew somehow what that animal represented. Then Merritt climbed back on his horse, turned around and said to his men without looking at Caleb, "Let's go." And they left. Caleb stood on the porch until the dust settled. Then he came down the steps slowly, walked over to Knight, put his hand on the horse's neck, and stood there with the afternoon sun on his shoulders. He did not know for certain whether Merritt had given up or simply pulled back. He did not know what the circuit judge would decide. He did not know whether the witnesses would have the courage to speak when the time came, but he knew where he was. He knew the land beneath his feet was his. He knew the animal at his side was unlike anything he had ever encountered in his life, that it had taught him that patience was strength, that silence was language, that trust was an act of courage greater than any saloon bravado. The circuit judge arrived in Redstone on a Tuesday under a low sky of rain clouds. The hearing lasted 2 days. The 8 witnesses spoke. The 2 former workers of Merritt spoke. Reverend Hale spoke. And Caleb presented the purchase contract signed by Judge Aldrin, every line clean and legal, as it needed to be. Cole Merritt hired the best lawyer in the county. But there were documents, there were testimonies. There was a history of intimidation that the walls of Redstone had absorbed for years and that had finally found a room with the right man to hear it. The circuit judge ruled that the Harlow Ranch belonged to Caleb Durst without contest. He also ordered an investigation into the death of old Harlow's cattle and the poisoning of his water supply. Cole Merritt left Redstone on a different horse than the one he had arrived on, with the expression of a man who knows the wind has shifted and will not blow the same way again. That night, Caleb sat on the repaired porch of the house that was now truly his, with the star-filled sky over Redstone, and night moving loose on the land like a fluid shadow in the darkness, the amber eyes appearing and disappearing like distant flames. Caleb had arrived in that town with $11. He had spent 10 on a ranch everyone said was cursed. He had kept $1 that soon went on fence wire and rice. But he had kept the land, and he had kept the horse. And he had discovered, in that slow and silent process of earning the trust of an animal that trusted no one, that he had gained something else as well. He had found again a part of himself that the years of the road and the weight of other men's debts and the small humiliations had buried deep. He had learned that the worth of a man is not in what he owns. It is in how he treats what he cannot buy. That night, Caleb Durst, the broke cowboy who had bought a ranch for $10, slept inside the house in a new bed he had built himself from lumber taken from the old barn, with the sound of the wind in the hills and the soft steps of a black horse outside, walking free the way he should always have walked. And for the first time in many years, there was nothing weighing on him, only the good silence. The silence of a man who has arrived.